Let's get together to
to
co-create a breakthrough for freedom of energy, sustenance, healing, and regeneration of the human vessel. Welcome to FESIG, the Free Energy Special Interest Group, where science meets spirituality in the quest for truth and knowledge to free humanity and transform this planet into a paradise.
Hi everyone, it's so good to see everyone here today. My name is Crystal Gore and I'm the founder and initiator of FESIG, the Free Energy Special Interest Group. And today we are having our, you need to see me. Hi, and today we are having our 71st FESIG meeting. Today is the 4th of December 2019, right? And the next meeting will be on the 8th of January 2020, because the first Wednesday of the month would be New Year's Day. So today we are going to start off with an introduction of the speakers, and I need to share screen of my PowerPoint presentation. One sec. Yeah. So welcome to FESIG, the Free Energy Special Interest Group, the 71st meeting held on online on Zoom.us software online, and we've got people from all over far corners of the world, but mostly in the US, Canada, Europe, UK. And we start our meetings usually at 7:30 GMT. And FESIG is a platform where we encourage scientists to go within to, to get the answers of the missing equation, because that's where it lies. And this is a platform where science meets spirituality. And today's agenda is we have the first session. I'm chairing the meeting, and my co-chair today is Fraz Frazzle. And the first session we're going to have that's the first hour. We have our first session speaker, Dan Winter, who's speaking about physics of the universe, the existence of sacred geometry in the Earth grid and beyond, and sacred sites, and more. Of course, then, I'm sorry, I think there's an interruption in my internet connection. I've got to share screen again. And so it's very interesting to listen to Dan, and he's got a very infectious enthusiasm that all of us would be pulled into that energy level, and that would be great. So, and then the second session, 1 hour later, we'll have our second session speaker, Toby Grotz. And Toby Grotz is amazing with his presentation at Global BAM, and I nicked the two speakers from Global BAM anyway when we were there in Amsterdam, Contes. And it was such a highly charged, energized conference where the speakers are really amazing with their presentations, one after the other. Toby Grotz being one of them. And Toby Grotz was presenting the Bruce De Palma's discovery, free energy, anti-gravity, space drive, and the future of science, and his take on the influence of, I actually threw this in, Toby, I hope you don't mind, your take on the influence of Vedic philosophy on Nikola Tesla's work. It's my favorite subject. And so once we have finished all this with a Q&A session, each speaker will do about 45 minutes, and we have about 15 minutes Q&A, with all in attendance here. And then once we finish these two sessions, this meeting will then adjourn to the 72nd FESIG meeting on the 8th of January. The first day of the year, you won't have time to attend FESIG's meeting. So I have adjourned it to the second Wednesday of the month of the new year, 2020. All right, so if you need to communicate with me and write to me at crystal@truevisionofpeace.com. Okay, so this is brought to you by me and the FESIG team. Thank you. That's it. Yeah, so I'm going to introduce Dan, the first speaker. Right, so I will introduce you properly then. Dan Winter is an electrical engineer, plasma tech, implosion, biofeedback inventor, and fractality physics researcher. Oh, before I continue with Dan's bio, I also want to point out to you that you can go to physics website, okay, and you will see all the introduction and the links there. You can go to Dan's website. All the speakers' websites are all linked up in the website. So you can discover their science in detail in your own time when you click on the links to get in, all right? Okay, so I continue with Dan's bio. Dan Winter has a multifaceted background that spans a broad spectrum of disciplines. He graduated with honors at the Jesuit University of Detroit. He pursued graduate studies in psychophysiology and the origins of languages. He has worked as a systems analyst with IBM, an industrial metallurgist, and a crystallographer. He has undertaken many diverse studies from quantum physics to modeling at the MIT Space Lab to developing the early biofeedback prototype equipment as Dr. Albert Agg's protege. Widely traveled, Dan has sojourned to study at the Gurdjieff School of Sacred Gymnastics in Florence with Buckminster Fuller, the Giza Pyramids, Israel, the Andes, and at Findhorn. Dan lectures extensively around the world, especially known for his applications of mathematical modeling to optimize spiritual development as a spin-off of his research on the relationship of emotion to wavelength structure. One important tool developed by Dan is a heart tuner, which measures or quantizes the onset of conscious self-awareness by virtue of the apparent geometry of the heart harmonics, being geometrically linked by progressions based on the powers of phi, the golden mean 0.61803333989. Dan is a prolific writer, and much of his work is available on the internet. Just search his name, Dan Winter. Out comes a lot of links. We absolutely love his work. The fractal nested compression of a ether through ratcheting dodecahedra geometries is mind-blowing and intuitive. So we're looking forward to Dan's presentation. Right, so then we'll talk about physics of the universe, fractal physics of charge distribution in the vacuum, phase conjugation, wave fractality, the perfect golden spiral on the cone, the existence of sacred geometry in the earth grid and beyond, sacred sites and more. So over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Crystal. You're too kind, and I'm happy to be with everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, this particular talk, with Crystal's kind invite, I think I was going to focus on how an electrical engineer might understand the concept of the Earth grid in rather practical terms, where we know that sacred geometry effectively means simply the geometry of where waves cross in constructive symmetry. That's pretty obvious. And that sacred geometry is really just a name for understanding wave mechanics, really, which is constructive wave interference again. The concept of the Earth grid, I think, has more insight to render to science than is at first apparent. You know, normally when people talk about the Earth grid, people assume it's woo-woos and not scientists talking. However, I'd like to point out some examples that beg to differ. Namely, you know, Bruce Cathy, whom I knew quite well, had documented that at the places where the speed of light made constructive interference around the Earth grid, which is roughly corresponds to anti-gravity in the world grid, Becker and et al., the Dodecki-Kosek classic world grid model, that at those nodes, it was dramatically measurable that nuclear critical mass was affected, namely that it took less radioactivity to reach critical mass at Earth grid cross nodes, which for a while that was a highly secret sort of national security piece of information. But I'm going to suggest that we put these pieces of the puzzle together and understand the science electrically. Second of all, I'd like to use the example of the famous Kozyrev mirrors, where the Kozyrev group did fabulous work out of Russia, and our friend Korotkov worked with them for years. Essentially, it started with what amounts to a pretty large metal cylinder, which we now know is microwave tuned by radius. And you put these large microwave cylinders at very special places. Namely, you measure the Earth grid magnetic line cross node for a minimum number of magnetic nanoteslas of flux density, and then you can place this Kozyrev mirror, quote unquote. And inside of these devices, as Korotkov repeatedly measured, the quality of telepathy was military grade, repeatedly and replicably. So again, Earth grid cross node produced this action at a distance. And there's many examples. I would like us to understand this in terms of the science of what's we now know is longitudinal electromagnetic interferometry, which, as many of you know, is my passion of late, to understand the concept of the sacred and negentropy in terms of longitudinal wave mechanics. As a way of then talking about what enables action at a distance and what geometry enables this grid to work. I was going to attempt a little desktop share here for just a moment to see if I, let's see, share desktop. Let's see if this works. So if you can see my little animation here, are you seeing my little transverse wave thing here?
No, we don't.
Let's see. Is the desktop sharing working?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, obviously, and most of you have seen this visualization before, that almost all of the communication science that we use today uses the component of motion in the electromagnetic wave, which is called transverse, which is up and down, essentially, which is animated here, which is essentially that the axis of motion of the wave, which is modulated, is perpendicular to the axis of propagation. Very much different than a longitudinal wave, which characterizes sound waves, which is animated below, where the compressional wave moving is parallel to the direction of wave propagation. And for sound waves, we use longitudinal waves all the time, but for electromagnetics, physics has not learned to use that component of the wave, the longitudinal wave. Now, in Russia, these are called torsional waves, primarily because you use a spiral antenna to propagate a wave that can become longitudinal. And you can understand that with this visualization here, that if the transverse wave enters at the left going up and down, and it goes down a spiral on a cone accurately, idealized by golden mean ratio spiral, sometimes called the perfected caduceus, that the inertia of the transverse can be translated non-destructively into a longitudinal wave, which we now know is optimized when it's tuned precisely to the Planck threshold, and that longitudinal wave is well known to travel faster than the speed of light in spite of Einstein. And that understanding this can lead us to a profound understanding of not just the Earth grid, but the concept of the sacred and the concept of what is heaven and all the cool stuff. So to understand getting between longitudinal and transverse, there's a classic visualization, you've seen it, that if you see an ocean wave moving, that the ocean wave is obviously going in a circle. And a certain amount of the inertia is going up and down, and a certain amount of the inertia is going parallel to the direction of propagation. For example, the classic, which we've discussed many times, that the tsunami, when it's going through the ocean, is mostly longitudinal, and it's only when it comes to the shoreline, which is that curve, it translates the longitudinal back to transverse. And it's the up and down motion that destroys the shoreline. So similarly, when the longitudinal wave enables action at a distance, which Einstein called spooky incorrectly, actually what's happening is the longitudinal wave re-enters a cone spiral at that distance and resynthesizes the transverse or heat-containing component, enabling, for example, containing heat at a distance, which is how Uri Geller and others heated a thermistor with the mind at a distance through a Faraday cage repeatedly in a lab. So longitudinal waves are important, and you can see that if you want to enable compression, I don't know if this little animation is going to play or not. Oh, there it goes. Here we have the animation playing. That for centripetal force, which is thus negentropic and healing, to work, the primary component of that wave needs to be longitudinal, as Tom Bearden emphasized. So basically, to make four-wave mixing work, to get compression enabled, which is obviously the origin of negentropy, you needed the longitudinal component of the wave and not transverse. Obviously, if the transverse wave arrives at the nucleus of the cell or the nucleus of the atom, the transverse wave is going up and down, and it's going to make the nucleus nervous, but it's not going to initiate symmetric centripetal compression, which is the possibility of negentropy, self-organization, and the physics of nuclear activity. So now I'm going to stop the screen share here. 1 second, turn off the screen share. How do you do this? Stop the sharing. Yes, go back to my face. So, well, now start. Can you see my face now? There, I'm back. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yes, we can.
So, why is this important? Well, let me give you some examples. The Therify system we had invented, we're doing successful rejuvenation for people and pain reduction in 25 countries, Therify.net, took what Antoine Priory had done healing thousands of cancers documented by the French government, and we discovered the physics principle, which is phase conjugation tuned to Planck, my equation. You can see the physics at fractalfield.com/physics. And that system, as Tom Bearden well taught about Priory, the active component is the longitudinal coherence, the longitudinal wave, the compressional wave. Now, these plasma systems are famous among the therapists, the Therify operators, for successful healing at a distance that's done every day, all the time, by dozens of our centers. And we actually know the physics. We understand the physics very well. It's not a mystery. Einstein was wrong to call it spooky. In fact, we understand the physics so well that we can optimize it, namely that if the sender and the receiver are both at an Earth magnetic line cross point, then the action at a distance works better. Also, just like Agnihotra, that the negentropic effect is more effective at sunrise and sunset, as was sun gazing for spiritual enlightenment. And we understand the physics because that is the moment at which you have the right angle physics of four-wave mixing, which makes the pine cone kiss noses accurately, named phase conjugation, enabling longitudinal embedding, longitudinal coherence, and therefore action at a distance. Now,
sorry to interrupt. Dan was mentioning Agnihotra, which is a fire ceremony that the Ayurvedic practice does in India. Is that correct? The Sun Yogi taught us that.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, they use a pyramid-shaped copper or gold, and we know why. That's how you make implosive dielectrics. And above that, you use a ghee, a flame, which is obviously a living plasma, and you ignite it precisely at sunrise, sunset, where you have that exquisite right angle, enabling the famous green flash and phase conjugate embedding. And we have seen, I've been there in Poland, that the whole bioregion can turn from a desert into fertile if Agnihotra is done correctly, repeatedly. Wow. And we understand that
cow dung, dried cow dung.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and the ash itself is even healing. So it is the physics principle which is of interest here, and that is that, you know, when pine cones kiss noses accurately at the Planck threshold, they phase conjugate, implode, and charge has a way out through the speed of light into longitudinal propagation, which enables collective unconscious ancestor memory, is how you release ghosts, and is the physics of the obvious electrical black hole required for successful death, which we now know exactly where ghosts need to go and why at death, and it's been measured. They need that implosive compression of charge that enables them to achieve that charge distribution efficiency, a fractal field, so to speak, named Hey Ave, breath of charge, heaven, or planes of Sharon, which, as Lawrence Gardner correctly taught, was the phase conjugate dielectric infinite electron shell unpacking of monoatomics, like monoatomic gold. Plains of Sharon is the Israeli name for heaven. So heaven is a place where charge distribution is efficient. And it's the physics of ancestral memory, collective unconscious, communion of saints. It enables us to understand almost all spiritual phenomena. Now, I would like to try to put some of that into a language that is so simple to understand that we could actually have fun with it. You know, when I was young, we went to a place in the Sacred Mountains of Western Canada. It was a pine forest. And I distinctly remember there that you could feel that this air was syrupy and the field was electrical and echoes were perfect. Now, we know this famous Sufi movie, Gurdjieff's Meetings with Remarkable Men, that the test for who is the real Sufi master, who can make the perfect echo. And indeed, what we're describing here is the physics of making the perfect echo. And obviously, if you'd like to know what immortality is, as a physicist, the first thing you need to know is what is a perfect echo, because obviously that is charge distribution perfected. So one way to think about that I think is useful is if we were with Joe of the famous Joe Cell in Lismore in Australia with my partner Valerie, and had all those fun conversations about the Brown's gas, Joe Cell gas, the hydrogen gas, where it behaves negentropically like a syrup that has a mind. And we know that the plasma field of Therify, all our therapists know, eventually becomes very mindful, and you must treat it like a pet kitten whose whims require that everyone in the room has to like it or else it goes away. These plasma domains become mindful, and we know exactly why, and which explains why ball lightning so famously responds to telepathy. So the point I wanted to make was that these Brown's gas or Joe cell hydrogen plasma, or even the GANs that Keshe talks about without electrical understanding, that they not only become self-organizing and quote-unquote mindful, but they do something else, which is called conditioning the space, which we now know amounts to making a perfect echo except electrically. And I give you an example that, this famous Brown's gas, hydrogen gas, magna gas, there's 100 names for this water gas, as was discussed at the Amsterdam conference. You're driving in your car powered by this implosive hydrogen gas, and it's working pretty well, the famous Joe Cell car, except if you happen to park over a railroad track, it will quit. Now, if you understand the electrical engineering, it's perfectly understandable, because the steel of that railroad track is the opposite dielectric required for charge distribution efficiency. For the same reason why that for some centuries, half of Europe went to Arles to be buried, where John Trophimus, the son of Magdalene, melted the stone lid of his coffin, carried around by the Roman legion for 10 years, later called the Holy Grail, platen, with his aura. Except when the unfortunate French government was dumb enough to put a railroad track through that burial ground, guess what? It didn't work anymore. So conditioning the space is actually a matter of getting charge distribution efficient and implosion going to a critical mass of centripetal force. So for example, in the Therify plasma rooms, if all of the materials are high dielectric organic materials, then eventually the plasma imploding force in that room will be so great you don't even need to energize the device. It will heal people. And If you know all of the Essene saints, again, for example, John Trophimus, before he melted his coffin lid with his aura, as Padmasambhava melted the stone, you can see the handprint of Padmasambhava in the stone, where he melted the stone many times with his aura. Before he did that, John Trophimus was doing these sun gazing exercises where you do the sun gazing precisely on sacred waters, precisely at sunrise and sunset, and you implode longitudinally the plasma of the sun into your aura to the point where your aura will melt stone, which is obviously probably one of the only real ways to graduate from planet Earth and inhabit the stars, which every ancestor knows if you're not a sun god, you didn't graduate. And every religion essentially is a sun god religion, which is, having enough centripetal force in your plasma to inhabit a star, which is not escapism, it's called growing up. So this business of understanding how to acquire critical centripetal force in the aura starts with understanding the quote-unquote sacred geometry, which we now know as conjugate fractal implosion of charge geometry, called the Earth grid. And the hygiene for attracting that charge means that, making a magnetic map of your bed may be the most important thing you do in your life in terms of your ability to lucid dream and therefore take that coherence through death. So I'm not saying that understanding longitudinal wave mechanics is itself a spiritual path, but I'm saying that if you're inclined to a spiritual path and you would like to understand physics, then longitudinal interferometry is a good way to start. Now, to make another point about this, you know that after World War II, the rocket scientists from Germany went to the USA, but the radar scientists went to Russia, and Russia got the better part of that deal. The radar scientists knew how to make a paint that could bounce the radar off the submarine antennas. And it had to do with the thickness of that paint and the ability to conjugate the radar signal. Now, everyone says, oh, well, you're stepping on the toes of military intelligence. Of course, some people think the term military intelligence is an oxymoron, and we won't argue that here. But I would point out to you that if, in fact, the physics of how to make a mind requires exactly that business of conjugating between the hemispheres, then maybe we can't just relegate the study of phase conjugation to the military. Otherwise, we might have a planetary problem. And so we developed a technology called flameinmind.com, which teaches the frequency signature for exacting phase conjugation, which starts with Schumann harmonics in brainwaves for perfected meditation and bliss training. And the physics here is simple, that the very process of perception itself is the process of conjugating imploding charge at the peak of a pine cone, as evidenced by the fact that by actual statistics or testing we've done, that approximately 30% of people who go into a phase conjugate plasma, like Therify.net, report sharpening of vision. So I did this whole lecture, and you can see it at the Therify.net blog, to an international group of optometrists about vision and phase conjugation. And it's interesting that phase conjugate model of perception is not new. That in effect, it's called the reverse grass fire algorithm, that the boundary conditions determine the bounce back, determines where the waves phase conjugate back again then at center. And the ability to understand how sharpened perspective relates to making a perfect echo, it relates to what's called peak experience or peak perception or bliss experience. You know, that we've done these lectures for 30 years or so, and often we have audiences of scientists. And, one of the ways we found a good way to start those lectures was to say to the audience of scientists, well, You know, who in this room has had a bliss experience or a peak experience? And those scientists, please go to one side of the room. And those who have not, please go to the other side of the room. And that this tells you where you're going to start the lecture. And the reason is because once someone has had a peak experience or a bliss experience or a Kundalini experience or something, it gives them a new perspective on the possibility of what mind is. And one of the things that most all bliss or peak experiencers will report is a sharpening of perception to the point of, you know, you can feel a needle crack on the other side of the room as if it's inside your body. And the reason for that phenomena is the implosion of charge generated by peak perception, which is basically teaching the pine cones to kiss noses accurately, starting with your own brainwaves. And one more thing I might comment about the brainwave science that flameinmind.com is so successful. You know that we started with, you know, brainwave science really starts with teaching people how to make alpha in their brainwaves. Everybody knows that, the 4 to 10 hertz or 5 to 10 hertz. It centers around 8 hertz, which is the Schumann resonance harmonic, actually. And it turns out the Schumann resonance harmonics is a cascade, and the frequencies of that cascade correspond pretty close to my equation for the origin of biological negentropy, which is exactly Golden ratio integer exponents times Planck. And so the alpha, beta, delta of brainwave harmonics corresponds to Schumann harmonics so good that obviously the Schumann harmonics of negentropy, why Gaia is self-organizing, documented by Lovelock, is the same as the brainwave harmonics that make bliss, because both are the charge implosion that makes negentropy. So when you're measuring brainwaves, you know, the old joke is, on the same day you teach an alcoholic to make alpha in his brainwaves, the next drink of beer won't taste good. And the reason is, obviously, because, you know, we did a study. In fact, we studied the people who can make alpha in their brainwaves, when they close their eyes, they see light. People who cannot make alpha in their brainwaves, when they close their eyes, they see dark. It's obvious because you see light when your charge starts to implode, and you got Schumann going in your brainwave. And so the alcohol, by reducing oxygen, increasing conductivity, made alpha more likely in brainwaves. So the beer was having the function of turning the lights on. So it wasn't that the alcoholic was wrong to seek bliss. He was on the wrong turn on a right road to seek charge implosion, because at least your kids who are willing to risk death with sex, drugs, and rock and roll to get bliss are physically correct to risk their life to get a bliss experience, because actually imploding your aura is the only way to get an immune system, obviously, and also to get immortal, to take something through death. So the fact that making alpha, which is Schumann, in your brainwave turns the lights on inside your head tells you something about longitudinal embedding. How am I doing time-wise here, Crystal? Are we?
Time-wise, it's you're doing fine. I mean,
Okay.
You've just spoken half an hour.
Okay, all right.
Amen.
Well, I'd like to extend this conversation to a little more of the science. First, longitudinal interferometry, you know, microwave done well, can absolutely focus this plasma domain and resynthesize the heat-containing transverse at a distance to enable fusion heat containment, enabling fusion physics. And any fusion physics research, especially the Sapphire project, that doesn't understand longitudinal interferometry, in our view, is wasting the taxpayers' money. Now, obviously, this has all kinds of you know, implications for warfare. However, it doesn't mean that we can't speak about it, because it's also how your mind works. So until we get past this business where the USA steals more than half the patents and militarizes them, which is actually standard procedure in probably half the countries on the planet, we may not get to the physics of consciousness. There's a detail. But once we understand how to focus a longitudinal wave at a distance, we can achieve heat containment at a distance. And that is going to be the turning point in fusion physics research. Also, we are sure that the frequency critical isotope transitions, sometimes labeled LENR, which is basically the physics of alchemy, is only and always the non-destructive charge collapse enabled by longitudinal interferometry. And further, you know, I'm just giving a clue to some, we're involved in lots of research with dozens of research groups around the globe, but this is some meat for those who want to do energy research to think about. And that is, if you know, as our carbon nano team is able to do, to make carbon nano 95 to 99% pure, which half the governments on the planet are chasing because they don't know how to do it, then you replace every structural steel on the planet, and it's the most disruptive technology on the planet for sure. But even more important than that is, if you have those nanomaterials, and the incompetence of some of Keshi's friends is obvious here, sadly, but if you rotate these nanomaterials accurately, and the rotation speed is also constant, but if you rotate a conjugator like the carbon nano of sufficient purity, you produce your choice of energy or propulsion. And the reason why that's true is breakthrough physics. And it is essential to understanding how we can possibly graduate from schoolroom Earth. And it's also essential to understanding how then the humans no longer need to be fools for the Anunnaki, Draco, Uru, and Kingu. So it is our ticket to escape from abuse from ETs. And that's one of the reasons I'm pushing this physics. So how is it that rotating a conjugator produces both energy and propulsion, your choice? What is the practicality here? Let us understand first an example of producing a conjugator. Carbon grows into a flower called Buckminster fullerene, which is a stellation of Dodecaecosa. Our model for that is the Star Mother kit, goldenmean.info/kit. And I learned personally from Bucky Fuller some of the vector flexor, jitterbug, charge collapse physics. But in order to persuade carbon to grow like that flower, there are some conditions required, not unlike the electric field requires to cause a seed to grow. Now, you know that our life force technology, flameinmind.com/lifeforce, can predict by measurement in advance which building will make a seed grow. And that is called harmonic inclusive charge implosion. And thus determine which architects should get a paycheck and which ones should not, and which defines biologic architecture, which is basically charge implosion. Now, that same physics is the difference between carbon that will or will not grow coherently. I gave the example in the Amsterdam conference. We were laughing at the dumb Americans, victim of Tesla's mistake of choosing 60 cycle. And therefore, permanently meaning the Americans have no chance in the carbon nano war, which I think is rather beautiful karma for them, actually. I mean, I'm American, but you know, there's some karma over there. And militarizing the SWIFT banking system is one example of that karma. But a 60 cycle field effect prevents carbon from growing like a flower, because if you take exact integer exponents of golden ratio times Planck, you have a harmonic curve, which is named The Origin of Biologic Negentropy, my invention, and the title and the cover of my book. And you produce the harmonics of Schumann and the Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, solar year, precessional year, and the 3 radii of hydrogen, and the only 2 frequencies that make photosynthesis go, and the perfect curve of everything in the universe that is negentropic. And you produce the frequency 49.97 hertz, 50 hertz, which explains why 50 hertz is the most common frequency mentioned in all the medical literature for reducing cancer. It's not 60. Hello, no, it's 50, and it's one of the frequencies that Tesla and Freire and Minkowski and Rife used, and later it's one of the cascade and verified. So 50 hertz in Europe is actually an advantage. Well, this is an example of understanding that there is an electric field which enables growth, namely non-destructive charge collapse. Remember, Einstein got it right when he said non-destructive charge collapse is the unified field. What he did not know is what a fractal was. So effectively, a fractal field is the solution to all of these problems because non-destructive compression is the solution to almost every problem that science and philosophy has ever named. Look, urban design, history of computing, alchemy, how to get through death, what is the physics of fusion, physics of longitudinal waves. The solution to all these problems are non-destructive compression. And non-destructive compression, the solution of that is golden ratio exponents times Planck. And we published for the first time the proof, the generalized wave mechanic equations proving golden ratio is the solution to constructive wave interference in the science journals at fractalfield.com/mathematics of fusion. And once you prove using the generalized wave equations that golden mean ratio is the generalized solution to constructive wave interference, guess what you have proven is that it is therefore the solution to constructive compression. And once you know the solution to constructive compression, you have answered Einstein, infinite non-destructive compression. Well, actually, you see, it isn't actually infinite, it is more like infinite, namely that the compression enables a relief valve at center where the charge inertia that was transverse is released at the Planck threshold precisely into longitudinal wave propagation, sometimes named gravity waves, as Bearden correctly predicted also. And the proof of that is that, and the proof therefore of this is the cause of gravity, which I celebrate, is Professor Raymond Chow's famous many years of study of wavelengths that are faster than light, wave propagation velocities faster than light. And in his conclusion in all his literature is clear. The wave propagation velocity is faster than light, all center between 1.5 and 1.7 times c, the speed of light. Guess what's in there? 1.618. Hello, golden ratio. So if that is indeed correct, that the dominant velocity measured faster than light is exactly golden ratio times the speed of light, then there's no way for anyone to say that my theory of gravity is wrong, because actually letting charge out through the speed of light into longitudinal at the Planck threshold is why charge can go through center. And that geometry of compression of charge enabled by golden ratio, remember that I proved that the 3 main radii of hydrogen are exactly golden ratio exponents of Planck, proving this is the way hydrogen makes gravity, is that that golden ratio form of compression enables the adding and multiplying of not just wavelengths, recursively constructively, which is only golden ratio allows, but also the recursive constructive adding and multiplying of wave phase velocities. And when the phase velocities recursively add and multiply constructively, which only golden ratio allows, that produces acceleration of charge towards center only in the form of compression using golden ratio. And that acceleration of charge from that form of compression towards center is named the gravity. Obviously, since there's no experiment you can do that shows the acceleration you feel in an elevator going up, that physicists shouldn't say it's the acceleration due to gravity. They should say it is the acceleration of charge, which is gravity. All right.
Wow. That's very nice. That's fascinating, Dan. Thank you. Well, it's I would like to say that if you want to look into Dan Winter's work, go to his website. If you go to physics website, it's all linked up to his sites. And also do get into the 25% discount that Global BAM 2019, the Global BAM team has given physics supporters and listeners for the live streaming. And then you can stream Dan's presentation, Toby's presentation at Global BAM, and you can get all the details from there. Thank you. Over to you, co-chair Fraz, Dr. Fraz Frazzle, for the Q&A session.
Well, thank you very much, Crystal. And in many ways, I think we've overloaded many of our listeners, but it's kind of fun to play in the scientific realm instead of some of the others. Do we have some burning questions out there in the audience?
How about you starting the ball rolling, Fraz? I'm sure
Okay. I was just sitting there. I've been working for the last half hour trying to come up with some really good questions, because the problem that I ran into is mixing from one thought to the other. Basically, we talk about longitudinal versus transverse waves. And for our audience, can you give them, we talked briefly on microwave. Is there another way of explaining the differences in those two with something our audience might understand?
Yes, you know, the sound wave propagates longitudinally, meaning that it's a compression wave propagating. And so the direction of the propagating compression is parallel to the direction of propagation of the wave. Whereas a transverse wave, the inertia is going up and down perpendicular to the direction of wave propagation. And in electromagnetics, all of our communications technologies use only the transverse component of the electromagnetic wave, because the longitudinal component is difficult or more challenging to set up the conditions to receive that. But when we do understand how to receive longitudinal components, then we will understand stargates and action at a distance and all kinds of cool stuff. So it's worth studying.
So there is a similarity between sound waves and scalar waves?
Scalar is an inappropriate term used by some, what I would call woo-woo physics to name longitudinal electromagnetics. Even Bearden and others had used the term scalar, but the term scalar in physics is used for an entirely different purpose, and it's very confusing. So, but you know, it started when we were teaching psychotronics internationally, and I did that for many years, when we realized that if you take a loop of wire and connect it to a car battery, it would, if you take the loop of wire, connect it both ends to a car battery, it will melt. But if you take the same loop of wire and wind it into a caduceus, then touch it to the car battery, it will not melt. But in fact, if you point that at someone's belly, they'll feel nausea. Well, that was an introduction to propagating a longitudinal electromagnetic.
Okay.
We called it scalar in those days, but again, the more correct term is longitudinal electromagnetics.
Okay, super. We were talking with some fellow cohorts here a few days ago, and we were into the two forms of waves, and basically the idea that you can actually move from one waveform to the other, as there's actually 4 parts of electricity. There's a magnetic, the electrical, gravitational, and those, and we forget usually 2 of the 4 properties. And it's alluded to in what you're talking about, scalar, well, not scalar, but transverse and longitudinal waves. And we were wrapping our heads around this notion of transitioning from one to the other and back again.
Well, I think what people tend to forget in the schizophrenia from not knowing what a unified field is is that the universe is made of only one superfluid compressible substance, the compression of rarefaction of which is named charge. And when that charge traverses around the surface of a torus, the component that's coming centripetally towards center, you could think of as the magnetic component, and the same charge that's propagating perpendicular to that you call electrical. But the electrical and magnetic component are not a different substance. It's only that you pick up the vertical versus horizontal component using different aspects of inductive coupling, for example. So we often forget that we are only naming the propagation of charge, which is always toroidal, and the different vector components we have different names for, electric versus magnetic, for example. But it's all about the inertia of propagating charge.
Yes, this is Leroy. I've got a question. You had mentioned earlier about, I believe the term was a rotating conjugator.
That's right. You see in the Keshe material where they lift a car by rotating GANs inside of what's oversized ping pong balls, for example. But more practical examples of rotating a conjugator, when the Koski-Frost piezo crystal made 800 times its own weight in gravity. You can see the book at fractalfield.com/propulsion. The z-axis of that quartz is helical, and that rotates the conjugator. So you're pumping a conjugate RF wave in the sides, and you're producing propulsion. That's one example of a rotating conjugator, like Leeds-Scallan using the 12 rotating magnets for making lift in the coral castle. So rotating the conjugator essentially means you're screwing in the implosion and creating a directional vector in the charge implosion. And thus you can use the resultant gain in inertia, which is implosive, either for propulsion or for energy. All the equations for idealizing that are at fractalfield.com/propulsion. Example, the vortex, the iron-doped powder mercury vortex named Vimana Nazi Bell Hanibu, was effectively the same implosive piezo vortex that Schauberger made voltage from gravity from, and that was a rotating conjugate.
Thank you.
I have a question or a comment, a few comments I'd like to.
Go ahead, Swami.
Okay, it's Champak is Swami's the title, but anyways, you were talking earlier about Padmasambhava and the energy from the hand. Well, this reminds me of a friend of mine who was calling me because he was we do a lot of distant healing and so on and so forth. And so he calls me when he's in over his head and he wants to figure something out. And so we put our heads together. And anyways, what his problem was is that he was 5, 6 times he had blown his glasses, his eyeglasses, that burst into internal star pattern. Okay? And so what was happening is that, well, that's what happened on the last time, the 6th time, but the prior ones before there, his eyeglasses were fogging up. And so he takes them back to the optometrist and they go, wow, they look at this and it's not surface. It's not a surface injury to the lens, but it's internal, happening in the center of the lens, of the thickness of the lens. So we were going, okay, well, what's going on here? So in our pranic healing practice, what we do is we do a lot of this distant healing. And so in the advanced classes, we have what's called the unicorn light. And, and so what the unicorn light is it's the combination of the 3 chakras of the crown chakra and the forehead and the ajna chakra and bringing these into a beam, and it becomes like a laser light. And so that's what he was doing without having the education on this. He had just stumbled into the ability of doing this. And so what he had to remember is that when he's doing his healings is to take his glasses off.
I think that's a pretty useful metaphor. The unicorn's horn is a pretty good name for a pine cone kissing noses. And actually, you know, when the famous Phil Callahan, the lens of his liquid crystal oscilloscope was ridiculously distorted by the shaman blowing cigar smoke on it with infrared to take the evil spirit out. They sent it to the laboratory for analysis and had the same conclusion that you drew. And we also know that the glass bottles for charging water in the Therapy plasma field, if you overdo it, you lose the glass. So clearly charge implosion can eventually couple a crystal structure, and non-destructive collapse means, that's why it's very helpful to understand exactly why implosive hydrogen gas, like Brown's gas or Josehl gas, you can melt steel, but it won't burn your hand. That is the physics of why during the rapture guns will melt. The difference is dielectric constant.
Similar sort of thing happened with when the shaman Rolling Thunder came to Vancouver. I think it was in 1976, 78, something like that. And the United Nations was, they were holding a Habitat for Humanity gathering. And so there was a lot of big names, people that came. And so they wanted Rolling Thunder to present. Well, when he went to present, he asked the people there with their cameras to please turn their cameras off, because he would not be responsible for their cameras malfunctioning. Well, some of them did and some of them didn't, and those that did not turn their cameras off, they were all overloaded, and they essentially the circuits fried, because this was a man walking with a lot of power.
Yeah, and you know, also I think Rolling Thunder's famous answer, well, to make rain you tickle the belly of the right black beetle, who's, now we know it's the fractality of that particular nervous system, which is actually the famous Egyptian scarab. So actually the fractality is what triggers that charge implosion, which is rainmaking, which is, we have an article about that at goldenmean.info/rain. So yes, we respect that work a great deal. And you know, also your iPhone will mess up if it's too close to the plasma therapy for the same reason.
Yeah, I had occasion to go to that conference and meet up with them. And then another subject that you were talking about earlier about the sacred geometry. Okay, I was looking at getting into prospecting way back in the 70s and so on and so forth. And I stumbled across this little nugget of information about what some prospectors did, or is they do the as above, so below. They were looking for minerals on the planet, and so they looked at the atomic structure, you know, of the mineral and superimposed that on the map of the planet and went, okay, we have this, we know we have this here in this part of the world, and here, these deposits, and so on and so forth. And so scaling that onto the geometry of the molecule, then they went, okay, so since we know these are here and here and here, then there should be over here. And so this was one of the ways that they discovered tin, because there was a shortage of tin happening, and so they were trying to figure out where can we go look for tin, so let's look on the molecular.
Well, and in fact, the Anunnaki story about the gold powder is how you restore atmosphere actually and gravity stability. So gold deposit geometries are key to both atmosphere maintenance and gravity stability and can be modeled. So there's a lot there. It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting conversation here. I have time for only just one last question, and that has been posted by dear Abin. He says, is radiant energy the same as longitudinal waves?
Well, you know, charge radiance can be both longitudinal and transverse because you have a direction of propagation. But longitudinal is a particular kind of radiance in which the direction of compression is parallel to the direction of propagation. So it's like a sound wave. It's very appropriate to study this because what we call sacred space, we now know, is where these longitudinal waves cross efficiently. And that's actually the basis of the best place to get born or die or do all the sacred healing stuff. So it's very important science.
You know, it's so interesting listening to you, Dan. I really wish that you could come back again at another time to speak, because you got such a varied range of subject to cover, which is so spot on with physics vision. It's the science meets spirit stuff.
Well, thank you.
Just one last question. Dan, I heard you say that the longitudinal wave, if they go through an Earth node, are optimum for healing, for
yes.
And,
yes.
And what would you do? What would be an Earth node? I mean, which could you name any on? Because there's several different maps, or you know.
Well, the north versus south is difference between centripetal, centrifugal. Anti-gravity in the world grid was a good map. Making a magnetic map of your bed is critical. But essentially, it means that in dowsing, they call it the blind spring or the JED. And you can determine the sex of the installed labyrinth based on centripetal or centrifugal, which is just plasma projection, sometimes called JED tower, or Magdala, all were just names for plasma projection. So that ability to locate those nodes is related to the ability to get immortal, quite literally. You know, we have all those dialogues, two links, fractalfield.com/vacuum-energy is where the PowerPoint is for that conversation from my presentation in Amsterdam. And the other one is fractalfield.com/conjugate-mind. And you can see all the articles and links as well.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Really good presentation. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, we have, well, another question here from John. It says the description for the waves of consciousness. All I know is the levels of consciousness are beta, alpha, theta, delta. And if you mean with this question that it's waves instead of levels, perhaps then you can address that. Waves of consciousness.
Well, the difference between the center of the frequency bands, alpha, theta, delta, beta, is golden ratio and is the Schumann harmonics, and that clearly fits my equation, golden ratio times Planck. So that is an example of phase conjugate charge implosion by negentropy. The reason that alpha is associated with eidetic, that theta is more associated with the unconscious, and delta, deep sleep, whereas beta is the active mind, because as you get into the longer and longer wavelengths, it is more collectivizing. Mm-hmm. And therefore, ride the long wave, Uncle Joe. So ability to be awake as you go into the lower frequencies is exactly what's required to communicate with ancestors and take memory through death. And is indicated by the skill to lucid dream, which well predicts how much you will take with you at death.
Thank you, Dan. Right. Well, so I think the time's up now. Toby has been with us right from the beginning, and we can't take too much of his time. And I would like to, on behalf of FESIG and everyone here, thank you so much, Dan, for an awesome presentation today, and with the brilliant questions that Fraz, our co-chair, started the ball rolling with, and the answers you've given. It's great. Shall we ask you back at some point, Dan? Would you come back to FESIG to speak again at some point?
Sure, I'd love to. I enjoyed. Thank you. I was happy
Thank
to share.
you. Right. Thank you, Dan. And I think that's it, right, Fraz? Do you want to say one last thing before we close for this session?
No, we appreciate you greatly, and there is links at FESIG to your site, and I encourage our listeners to visit the site and follow the links. And Crystal, I'll let you wrap it up, and we'll start session 2 in a few minutes.
Sure. Well, perhaps you'd like to have a quick glimpse at the links. I will share screen now, and then I will wrap it up. Okay. So, oh shucks, I clicked the wrong button. Okay, yeah. So this is physics site, truevisionofpeace.com//physics. So if you go there, and you'll be able to see everything that you need to see there. The Global BEM live streaming, they were offering, I think it was last weekend, 50%. If you missed that, you still got our 25% discount, okay, to get Dan's full presentation in detail from Global BEM and Toby's as well. So if you hover over Dan's name, it will take you to his site, and same goes with Toby's. And it's the same treatment for all our speakers here in physics. Okay, so there you go. It's so easy to get to all the details. We're just touching the surface on this 45 minutes presentation. And if you scroll down the site, you can see the reports of the past speakers. We have Marina Jacobi, Fernando Bosa. Sometimes we have a forum of the Physics Executive Council members, and we have Dr. Lucky, and so on and so forth. So just help yourself. And this site, of course, all the recordings of the meetings verbatim is been processed into YouTube. Okay, so you just click on the link that says click here for physics meeting video links. It takes you to our video links, and or you could just click on to our Facebook and YouTube links here right on the top. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. There being no other business, this first session of the 71st physics meeting is now adjourned to the second session where Toby got 6. Okay, namaste. Thank you, everyone. Okay.